What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be talking all about the Shrouded Proficiency in Call of Duty Vanguard, as well as on the Vanguard weapons in Warzone, because it seems like there's quite a bit of confusion surrounding this. I've had a lot of people wondering if it's worth using and what it actually does. So today we're going to be breaking that down, and let's start it off with the multiplayer side of things before we get into Warzone. And if we have a look at the description for Shrouded, it says it reduces the angle at which enemies will see glint from sniper scopes, and it increases the time before the glint appears. And then when you look at the listed pros, it just said scope glint concealment. So the first thing I wanted to test, because the first thing that a lot of people assumed that this would do, is it would just reduce the amount of glint that you have, like the actual brightness of that scope glint, which when you have a look at them side by side here with and without Shrouded, you can see that it's just as bright in either case. So this doesn't have really any impact on the brightness or the visibility of your glint. So let's move on to the other factors that are actually listed in the description. And the first factor we're going to have a look at is the angle at which you can see the glint. So for those that aren't aware, when you aim down sight with a sniper rifle, you're essentially generating a cone from your point of aim, and anybody that's within that cone will be seeing your scope glint, and anybody outside of that cone won't be seeing your scope glint. And taking a look at the angle here, pay close attention to the compass on the top. As you can see here, I'm aiming just to the right side of the target, right on the edge of the enemy character model here, and it's at 199. Then I aim down sight so I can see the scope glint from the other player's perspective, and I slowly sweep my aim across to the point where I'm no longer seeing glint. And then as you can see here, this leaves us at 209 on the compass. What this means is without Shrouded, you are going to be giving off scope glint in 10 degrees to either direction. So it's technically a 20-degree cone that you are projecting with this scope glint. And it is worth noting, this is exactly how it worked in Modern Warfare's multiplayer as well. It was a 20-degree cone that you would be projecting. But that's how the base glint works. This is when you're not using that Shrouded Proficiency. Now let's see what the angle looks like with Shrouded, because this is listed in the description that it will reduce that angle. And once again, we start off at 199 at the edge of the target, and then I do the exact same test here, and we end up at 205. So it looks like it's about a 6-degree angle in either direction when you're using Shrouded, which is a very noticeable reduction to the size of that cone, and the coverage area is going to be much smaller, especially when you start stretching that range out quite a bit. So that's the angle of the cone with Shrouded, but the other stated stat is it increases the time before the glint will appear once you start aiming down sight. And this may vary from gun to gun, and it may depend on your attachment setup, but just know in my tests I was using the same gun with all the same attachments, and without Shrouded, from the moment I started aiming down sight to the moment that the enemy could see my scope glint, this was 600 milliseconds, which is worth noting with this particular setup. This means that I wasn't even fully aimed down sight before my scope glint started to appear. So even if you're trying to quick scope with this particular setup, the enemy will be seeing that glint before you get fully aimed down sight. Whereas the moment I put Shrouded on this exact same setup, now it takes 1 full second before that scope glint appears. So at this point, I've actually been aimed down sight for a little bit of time before the scope glint even appears. And therefore, if you are quick scoping or even just trying to get a fairly quick shot off after aiming down sight, you could potentially do so without the enemy ever seeing any scope glint from you. So it absolutely is helping in this area, and that's a pretty big boost as well. That's a pretty big difference between 600 milliseconds and 1 full second. And that's pretty much it when it comes to multiplayer. That's how Shrouded works in multiplayer. It will reduce that cone as well as increase the amount of time, just as it's stated in the stats. Now I wanted to have a look at this in Warzone to see if it behaves any different, because there is a lot of inconsistency from multiplayer to Warzone. Sometimes things don't work exactly the same, sometimes they do, and I just wanted to put this to the test. And once again, I just wanted to do a test to see if Shrouded has any impact on the brightness of that scope glint or the visibility of that scope glint when an enemy is aiming directly at you. And as you can see here, no, it doesn't. It's going to look exactly the same with or without Shrouded if they're aiming directly at you. And then once again, I did do the test on the angles. I'm not going to show you every single test here, but I did the exact same test where I was sweeping left and right of the target, and I was able to determine that it's exactly the same as multiplayer. So without Shrouded, you're going to have that 20-degree projection of that scope glint cone, which does line up with all of the Modern Warfare snipers and weapons and optics that have scope glint on them. Whereas with Shrouded, that cuts this down to a 12-degree cone, which, especially at really long ranges, this is going to make a big difference, because since it is a cone, the farther you get away, the more area of coverage that you're going to be having with that particular cone. and therefore the more of an improvement you're going to be noticing with the Shrouded Proficiency on your gun. Now finally, I did also double check and do the test with the scope glint and how how long it takes to appear when you start aiming down sights, and I got the exact same results as multiplayer. Without the Shrouded Proficiency, it takes about 600 milliseconds for your scope glint to appear from the moment you start aiming down sights, and then with Shrouded, it's now delayed to 1 full second, so you're gonna have that little bit of extra time before the enemy can see that scope glint as you start to aim down sight. So there we have it. That's going to wrap it up for the breakdown of Shrouded. As for my opinion on this and whether or not it's actually worth using, I would say when it comes to regular multiplayer, probably not. And a big reason for this is just simply due to the engagement style and the engagement ranges that you're going to tend to find in multiplayer. Since most of the lines of sight are going to be either more close quarters or they're going to be taking place in a fairly narrow lane where it doesn't really matter if you reduce that cone, either way, any enemy within that lane is going to be able to see that cone. Yeah, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference for you in regular multiplayer. Additionally, to be honest, I don't think there's really that many great hiding spots where the enemy wouldn't have spotted you anyway. Like, I don't think there's too many situations where the enemy is only spotting you due to your scope glint and otherwise they would have never seen you. So I just don't think Shrouded is a good choice for multiplayer. I mean, it's not hurting you at all, so if there's no better proficiency that you have unlocked at that moment, sure, throw Shrouded on by any means, but it definitely wouldn't be my first choice when it comes to multiplayer. As for the Warzone side of things though, I think there's a lot more utility in using Shrouded. I'm not saying it's necessarily the best proficiency for every setup and every gun, but I would say especially for the people that like to treat it more like traditional sniping where they're really hanging back trying to pick people off at really long ranges. They're not going for those really quick snapshots or quick scopes or anything like that. It's more so you want to be aiming down sight, maybe scanning an area at longer ranges, or you're just trying to pick enemies off from a concealed location like 200 plus meters away, then yeah, I would say Shrouded is probably going to be helping you in a good variety of situations. If, however, you are one of those more aggressive snipers where you're not really trying to fire from a concealed position all that often, Shrouded's probably not going to be doing a whole lot for you, and you're probably going to be much better off choosing a different proficiency on your gun. Now, of course, these are just my opinions based on the analysis that I've done with the Shrouded Proficiency. I'd like to hear from you guys in the comment section below. What do you guys think of Shrouded? Were you surprised by how Shrouded works in both multiplayer as well as Warzone? And do you think it is worth using in either of these games? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.